Scotland squeeze out a victory over Italy at Murrayfield. Wales leave Paris with nothing, and it's a St Patrick's Day to remember for Ireland as they secure their 4th Grand Slam, beating England in Dublin. I'm Fergus Mainland, and welcome to the TW2's Six Nations Review Show. To review all of the action from the final weekend of the Guinness Six Nations, I'm joined in the studio by James Price and Imogen Ainsworth. And James, have you managed to fully recover from Super Saturday?
It was a good Super Saturday. All the results went the way we probably thought they would, but it was a good one, yeah.
And Imogen, straight off the bat, was it a red card?
No.
It wasn't. Cool. No. Well, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that as we delve through that performance, and we'll start with it, actually. We'll start in Dublin, the city that was painted green after Ireland's Grand Slam, their 4th Grand Slam throughout the Six Nations and Five Nations. And James, coming to you off the bat, I think it wasn't as big of a scoreline as we thought it was going to be. Obviously, we've had that red card that we've just mentioned to Freddie Stewart, but it wasn't the all-conquering Ireland performance that I think many thought it was going to be.
Yeah, the scoreline, I think, even it was 29-16 in the end to Ireland, and even then, that was still quite kind to Ireland. I think the only reason they managed to maybe score one or two of those tries is attributed to the fact we were a man down for 40 minutes. In the first half especially, England really rattled Ireland, I think. They, uncharacteristic mistakes from the likes of Sexton, slicing kicks out straight into touch. You just didn't see that for the previous 4 games. England really had them under pressure and finally looked like a proper side with a proper attacking plan to an extent. Obviously, it still wasn't perfect. But for the first 40, that 10, 12, 13 combination of Farrell, Slade and Tuolangi looked promising. I think it probably worked a little bit better than we've seen for the rest of the tournament. But yeah, like you say, England managed to finally front up. We saw the desire, and I think that was the most important thing. The mindset, you can't teach mindset, but you can teach better attacking shape. So it's good to see.
Yeah, I think going after that France game, we were obviously both there, and I felt quite dejected, just as an English rugby person. But actually watching that game, while not perfect, I think definitely some good bits to take away. If England can push number 1 in the world that far with 13 men at one point, then I think it's quite positive that they can show that they can still put performance up when they're kind of with their backs against the wall, which I think was definitely needed. And I think won't definitely forget the France score, but I think they've definitely helped themselves going forward by giving that performance. I think if it had been something similar, I think there would have been a lot of unease and unhappiness around the England camp. I think while that France score was obviously record breaking in all the wrong ways, I think the way the team performed, you couldn't have asked for much more from them. For England fans, they couldn't have asked for anything more. So I think it was an apt end to a weird season for England.
Yeah, it's been bizarre, but sticking with that Ireland side, I think one of the big takeaways from it was, despite not having a particularly good attacking prowess in this game against England, it was their defence that shone through. And there's a graphic that's coming up on screen now which talks you through basically how strong not just Ireland's attack has been, James, but more importantly, how good their defence has been, conceding just so little tries throughout this
Only 6 tries they've conceded across this whole championship. And if I'm correct, I believe Scotland was second with 14 conceded. So that is a massive margin in terms of their defence. Obviously, I think Simon Easterby has been, of that coaching setup, he's the most underappreciated maybe, because you've got Andy Farrell who sort of led this, I say resurgence in Ireland, they were quite good before, but they've come back to be brilliant again. And yeah, he needs to be given a lot of credit for that defence that he's built that looks, impenetrable a lot of the time.
Yeah, and Imogen, I suppose a lot of that will come just with the amount of time that these players will be spending at Leinster. We've talked about it previously in this show, just about how important that's been to Ireland. But I suppose it's setting up really impressively for Ireland's run towards the World Cup.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the squad at the start of the week had 20 out of 37 players from Leinster, and then the team that started was 12. So obviously it's a massive margin of players from Leinster, and something that I've been kind of keeping an eye on, the cohesion chat. So this time last year, before England played Ireland, there was Eddie Jones saying Ireland are the most cohesive team in the world, and Charlie Ewell then said in a press conference that I was at that England are never going to be able to match that. But he said when it comes to World Cup time, the teams have a lot longer together, so that cohesion that Ireland already have ingrained in them when they go into a Six Nations camp, the teams in the World Cup have a good few weeks together to build that cohesion before, and then they have obviously the tournament as it is. So I think Ireland do lose that as being their standout factor during the World Cup. Just obviously it will be so much stronger, but the fact that teams have so much time together, and then it's not just Ireland that are kind of coming in with a ready-made squad, I think that's been part of their downfall at World Cups. They historically haven't got as far as people would think on paper, given their Six Nations results, etc. But yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see this England squad. Obviously, it's a slightly new England squad coaching-wise, but there haven't been too many changes in the team. So I think they really need to work on how they get their cohesion to a level that's world-class. I think that's where quite a few teams need to compete with Ireland. I think England physically probably match them and probably lift more than them in the gym and things like that. But it's just the fact that Ireland know each other inside and out, because so many of them play together, which we won't be able to replicate in England, obviously. But it's nice to see when it comes down to the World Cup what they can do with that.
And James, sticking with England, when Steve Borthwick inherited this team, he was saying there was so much wrong with it, so many different elements of it that needed improved. And as we can see from this graphic, the scrum in particular was one area of real concern. And while England have really struggled throughout this tournament, actually, do you know what, it's their scrum and their line-out, some of their set pieces that have worked particularly well for them.
The set piece, both scrum and line-out, have been vastly improved since the autumn. In terms of attacking shape and attacking how good we've been in attack, essentially, that's slightly dipped, and I think that's visible from what we've seen on the pitch. But in terms of set piece, it's been so much better, and that is so important as an England team, because so much of what England have done sort of historically has been built off the back of set piece. I was listening to Jamie Heaslip talking on the BBC, and he was saying how he used to almost fear going up against an England pack because they always brought physicality, and that England pack, despite the brilliant names on the team sheet, haven't quite brought that. I mean, we've had some great back rows in the likes of Lewis Ludlam and Jack Willis, but Jack Willis is at the breakdown, that is his main skill. Lewis Ludlam is sort of a workhorse all over the place, but you wouldn't necessarily say he's the most physically imposing back row. But yeah, to see the set piece functioning a lot better is definitely a massive sign for improvement.
Yeah, we've sung the praises of Ireland, rightly so, winning their 4th Grand Slam in what we are assuming and what will probably be Johnny Sexton's final game. He's overtaken Ronan O'Gara
in the Six Nations.
In the Six Nations.
In the Six Nations. Got a World Cup.
Yeah, as he's now the record point scorer, which is phenomenal from him. But I suppose just concluding this game with England, Imogen, has the journey that this England team has been on from the start of the Six Nations to this game concluding in Dublin, have you been inspired? Have you gained more confidence in what Steve Borthwick can do with this England side and what the potential is for this England team?
I think had you asked me that if the France game had been the last game of the Six Nations, it would have been a completely different answer. But then if you look at things like the scrum, like the line out, the change that he's managed to, and the players have managed to put in a relatively short amount of time, I think is hugely positive. Those are the type of things that kind of your armchair critics won't really look at and won't really have much to say about, and it'll be all the performance, But the fact that Steve has managed to turn that around, obviously he's a forwards man himself. It was a massive part of his coaching at Leicester was the forward pack and them just being formidable. And I think the fact that he's managed to do that so quickly is really, really impressive. I think we can have confidence. There's obviously things to work on, but I think anyone going into the tournament would have been naive to think that we'd be winning and beating France and Ireland, because that just wasn't realistic. So I think, we'll talk about it a bit later, their groups in the World Cup and stuff. And I think they do have a real chance of doing quite well. We've obviously got a few months to go now until that. I think we can be optimistic. I wouldn't say confident, but I think we can be optimistic with how they can go forward.
Probably better than it was at the beginning of the tournament. And I suppose on the flip side, James, one team that's finished their tournament on a shaky high was Scotland, narrowly escaping, snatching victory from what was potentially going to be the jaws of defeat against Italy. at Murrayfield, and it was a game that had journalists wanting to throw their match reports out at the final whistle. What did you make of that performance?
I thought the most interesting thing about it is the entire of Scotland's campaign hinged on whether Italy scored then.
Yeah.
Because if you do what you did and go up the end of the pitch, Blair Kinghorn getting his moment that he deserves. It's been a great campaign. We've only lost to France and Ireland, 3 wins. We're on the way up again. Other side, we've lost 3 games in a row after winning the first 2. It's absolute panic stations.
Yeah.
They've got the job done against Italy. It was always going to be a bit nervy. They can move on and hopefully upwards towards the World Cup.
And what's important is that they got the job done despite Finn Russell, despite Stuart Hogg, Grant Gilchrist was out, Richie Gray was out. They're losing a lot of key playmakers, particularly in the line-out as well with some of those forwards, Imogen. They looked like they were sort of sparkless at times, but finishing 3rd in the table behind the top 2 teams in the world, you can't really ask for much more than that.
No, you can't. As James said, we joked before it would be the most Scotland thing ever losing to Italy.
Oh, it would have been,
It would have been kind of one of those you just can't write. But I think, they've managed to finish the tournament on a real positive. Obviously, great results against England and Wales as well. And I think when you look at those players that were out of it, I think it's hugely positive that they can still perform despite those key players being missing from their squad. I think you're never going to have, it's unlikely you're going to have a squad you've got everyone available for selection. I think it shows a lot about their ability to adapt to situations against an Italian side that have been much better of late than we've seen them and really competed this year, I think, in the Six Nations and put up a good fight. So I think, it's hugely positive from Scotland. They can pull those results out. Yeah,
and James, just a final word on that Italy side. Before the Six Nations, at the launch event, Kieran Crowley talked about wanting to rebuild respect for Italy on the world rugby stage. I think he's managed to do that.
Definitely, because they've competed in every game, apart from that England game, maybe. But they've shown a serious case for themselves. That whole thing about them being knocked out of the Six Nations is gone now.
Yeah.
Especially because you look at the under-20s, they've been killing everybody. They've been so good. So the future is seriously bright for them.
Yeah, really looking forward to seeing how they develop, particularly to the World Cup as well. And Kieran Crowley seems to be full of optimism for the World Cup, I think, as he should be. But we had one more game, Imogen, sandwiched between that Scotland game and the Ireland game. Wales headed over to France, came out losers, 41 points to 28. Do you think Gatland, I don't really know where to start with this one because it's just been such a poor campaign for Wales. So I suppose starting with the big man himself, Warren Gatland, has he bitten off more than he could chew with this rebuilding job?
It's difficult when you look at it. Obviously, both him and Steve Borthwick came in just before the Six Nations. But then when you compare Borthwick to Gatland, Gatland's been there before and been with a lot of those players before. Steve obviously has as an assistant coach, etc., but he's never been a head coach. So I think from the outset, we had all have assumed that he'll just kind of walk in, everything will be sorted, but that's obviously not been the case. I don't know where the problems lie with Wales at the moment. We've heard horrific things coming out of their backroom kind of operations. We've heard, I think, Ken Owen said some of their management are leaving, but Warren Gatland refused to comment on who they are. I think Wales have got a lot going on that wasn't a simple, we'll take Pivac out and Gatland will fix it all. I think there's a lot of ingrained problems in Welsh rugby in general. You look at the club system, you look at the cap rule, we forget that they nearly called off their game against England for strike action, which is something that I think is a huge issue that Wales have had to overcome. And I think Gatland, he said he wasn't really aware of things like that. I think when he came in, and he
very strange.
If that's might be naive from him, but I think he's bitten off more than he can chew if he thought that he could come in and fix things without acknowledging the more ingrained issues in Welsh rugby, I think.
And on the other side of the ball, France, James, finished the tournament with a win at home in Paris, which is obviously brilliant for the fans. But did you feel, I suppose, with the points difference and the number of tries that they allowed Wales to score, were you expecting more from this French side? Or do you think they sort of fizzled out a little bit at the end of the tournament?
Maybe they did, but I think in retrospect or in overview of the whole tournament, it's pretty positive for them. They're back at home. The only place they lost to was in Ireland against the best team in the world, who ended up getting a Grand Slam. So I wouldn't look too unfavourably on them. They're going to be at a World Cup at home. You can't really ask for much more from them. And especially against England, we know when they're on fire, they're going to kill anybody, even Ireland. So
yeah, certainly. So France, as James said, they've been on fire apart from that defeat in Ireland. And speaking of that, what we're going to do now is take you through the TW2's team of the tournament, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, features plenty of green and blue shirts. Joining me and Imogen in the studio to take us through the TW2's team of the tournament is Alex Reid. And as you can see from the team on screen, there is plenty of green in that pack. Alex, talk us through just why so many of these Ireland players are featuring up front.
Well, they've had the standout set piece, I think, through the tournament. They've had the standout performers in the pack. Guys like Caelan Doris, Andrew Porter, Dan Sheehan have all been at the top of their game. And I think you can't really pick anyone else in those positions for me.
It's funny that you say that, given we said that England had the most successful scrummer line-out. I guess maybe most successful, but perhaps Ireland took the opportunities they had and used them better.
Yeah.
And from that line-out, of course, we've got Lewis Ludlam, the only England forward featuring in this. Why him and not someone else?
I think for me personally, his work rate was just incredible, especially with the England team he was playing with. They didn't always have the best results, but I think he always put in a solid performance. The first two games against Scotland and Italy, in the Italy game, he had the most tackles out of the England team. Scotland, he put in a massive shift as well. So I think for his work rate, he'd slot in well into our team and just push himself really far and do well in that regard.
And Alex, we've got Captain Fantastic Antoine Dupont at 9, but at 10, we've gone with Johnny Sexton. Now, why Johnny over Finn Russell?
Well, I was in the pub with my mates on the weekend and we had this discussion. I think if I was picking a team, I'd pick Finn. But in that Ireland system, Sexton can just dominate. He plays to his game so well. They look so organised. He just runs the show. And I think it would be unfair to pick anyone else other than Sexton in that role in that team.
And going through the rest of those bags, Imogen, the eagle-eyed viewers amongst our viewers will notice a deliberate typo in our centres. We've got Sione Huipilotu in at 12, when of course Hugh Jones would normally be in at 13. But it's just so difficult to choose between the likes of Hugh Jones and Gail Fickou. So we've gone with all three of them.
Yeah, of course. I think this was a bit of fun for us as a group. I think the way that Sione and Hugh played together was just something that we couldn't deny from the team, but also Ficcou's been so impressive in the centres. I think we couldn't leave him out. If we had a bench, maybe we would have put Hugh on the bench, but that was just too much discussion for us to have. We like to keep things minimum stress, so we went for a fun 3-man centre partnership, which probably hasn't been done before, but oh well.
Why not? There's always room for experimenting. Perhaps it's something Warren Gatland can do. Alex, we've gone with Andy Farrell as head coach of this, obviously leading Ireland to a Grand Slam. Was there ever any possibility for maybe Fabien Galthié to make his way into this head coaching position?
Not for me. Ireland's standout characteristic is their organisation, right? And that all comes from the top down. It all comes from Andy Farrell. So I think he's got to be the standout head coach. He's got to be the standout
head coach. Well, from one team to another, this was the TW2's team of the tournament. But at the same time, we were all playing fantasy rugby. And what you can now see on screen is the team that tops our fantasy leaderboard. And Imogen, coming to you, and this probably gives away who won our fantasy. Talk us through some of the selections that went into this team and who were some of the key players for you.
Okay, so I think with fantasy, one of the key things is just being clever with your selection. So I opted for as many kickers as I could have. Thankfully, Six Nations put Farrell in as a centre, so I have him as a kicker, I have Sexton as a kicker, and Vamos Ramos himself also as a kicker. And putting him as captain, I got an extra 20 points, and then any points he scored doubled as well. And much to my dad's disappointment, the week before when we were watching England be humbled by France, I was actually celebrating because I had Ramos and Penaud on my team who both scored, which helped me in my quest to top the leaderboard again. I was also clever and went for mainly players from the teams I thought would win, apart from one sneaky Italian player because I already had a Scottish player on the bench. So I thought, on the off chance, I didn't think Wales were going to win. Ken Owens was my hooker for the rest of the tournament before, but I thought,
you dropped him.
I've got to be sensible with this. And then Ludlam, like we mentioned before, work rate, had to have a baby rhino in there. a legend. And also, I think what massively helped me is, like the Awesome Nation, some of you forgot to change your teams again.
Yes, so, some of us.
So that's a lesson learned twice now. And you said it was a fluke last time, but you all forgot again. So here we are.
Yeah, very interesting what Imogen did with that bench there. How did you approach your bench decisions?
Well, I always had 2, but I was clearly wrong. So there we go.
Yeah, certainly. Well, as we can see, Imogen, you did top the table. Alex, congratulations on that second place performance. And I suppose, well, I'll award myself the wooden spoon for the worst place amongst us. Well, the worst place out of the point scoring.
So firstly, I'm disappointed in one of you. We have Kieran, who is on our course and is not a rugby fan per se. Managed to come third. Disappointing for you lot. Also, the Loch Ness Monster, we're still trying to work out who this is. So if you are the Loch Ness Monster, please A, get in touch, and B, start adding players to your team because you got 0 points. So got to be in it to win it.
Yeah, certainly. So that's 2 from 2 for Imogen in our fantasy rugby predictions, and she'll be looking to go 3 from 3 with the Women's Six Nations, which starts with this weekend. And of course, with fantasy teams, with teams of the tournament, there are plenty of individual moments of greatness. And that's exactly what we're going to look at next in the Abbey Wow Moment of the Week. Final time at this Six Nations Championship. Welcome to the Abbey Wow Moment of the Week. But fear not, viewers, because starting this coming weekend, you will be able to see the actual real-life Abbey Dow in action when the women kick off their Six Nations campaign against Scotland up in Newcastle. But Imogen, we've got a huge amount of talent on display in this week's selection of Moments of the Week. But we'll start with probably the wow, Abbey, wow moment for game-changing moment. And that is, of course, the red card for Freddie Stewart that we mentioned at the top of the show. Can you just talk a little bit about that red card and just why it was so controversial?
Yeah, so I think there's obviously been a lot on social media. A lot of people have come out with their views on it. I think for me, the thing is he was reacting in a split second to the knock on, and Keenan dipped his height. Freddie's, I think, taller than him anyway, so it was never, I don't think it was ever intentional from Freddie. You wouldn't like to think it was. I think it was one of those things that if you look at it on paper, maybe it would come into the rugby incident kind of category. Although it was mentioned, I think he said, I can't remember what he said, but something to do with the context of the game at the moment. So it does seem that external factors surrounding concussions and head injuries are being spoken about a lot more, which is obviously great, and that needs to be happening. But I think we spoke of it before, the purpose of a red card is so people change their behaviour, and I don't think Freddie could have changed what he'd done in that moment. He reacted in a split second, as he himself and Owen Farrell said, reacted in a split second. Horrible that it ended the way that it did and that Keenan failed his HRA. That's something we don't want to be seeing at all, but I don't think it was something that fell outside of the rugby incident category. I think I looked and it ticked about 3 or 4 of the 5 criteria for rugby incident, such as no foul play. It wasn't a foul incident, it was just he got in the wrong place at the wrong time. I think that was my kind of take on it.
Yeah. Regardless of that, it will be off to tackle school for him, somewhere where Owen Farrell has already been. And just very quickly, Alex, we do have a quick honourable mention, and that is to Johnny Sexton and lifting his, what will probably be his final Six Nations trophy.
Yeah, he lifted it on his own. Andy Farrell told him to, but he didn't want to, which is quite nice, I think. Shows he's a proper leader.
But what we're going to do for our 3 nominations, we're actually going to head back over to Murrayfield because we've got 2 that are coming out of Scotland's win over Italy, and that first one is for Duhan van der Merwe's try.
Yeah, he was floating a bit. It was a bit like Spider-Man. He just had a ball out. He was shooting his web. I don't know, but because the corner flag is no longer classed as out, he was able to use it to his advantage and just sort of jump into it and then place the ball down on the line. It was one of the best finishes I've ever seen, I think.
Yeah, if somehow his rugby career falls off a cliff, he's certainly got opportunities in gymnastics to look forward to. But Imogen, that wasn't the only massive moment, the Abbey wow moment that came out of that Scotland game, was it?
Yeah, so obviously Italy looked like they were on course to score and get themselves a result in that game. But Blair Kinghorn, who had already scored 2 tries, then managed to sail away with the help of Duhan to score his hat-trick. And he loves hat-tricks against Italy. He did it in 2019, I think, as well. So it was just a nice moment that kind of sealed the game for Scotland when we thought, you know, as journalists, you were there yourself, kind of thought, oh God, you know, Italy,
the best word
Italy could be scoring here. But I think it was just quite a nice moment. No least that it was a hat trick, and we don't see them too often. So.
And last but by no means least, Alex, we head over to Paris for a particularly outstanding moment from the French game.
Yeah, Ntamack breaks a line, then steps through a couple of people. I don't know how he's still on his feet, and then he's about to get tackled, but he chucks a classic out the back offload to Antoine Dupont. He then steps about 4 other people because he's Antoine Dupont. And then because he's Antoine Dupont, throws a 35-metre miss pass. And because Damien Pelot's there, because he always is, they're just walking at the corner. It's like, when I watched it, I was like, oh, yeah, me too. Yeah, because that's how normal people play rugby. It's just amazing.
So, Emil, out of those 3 tries that we've run through, which one do you think deserves the Abbey Wow moment of the week?
I think for pure wow factor, Douan's try, the fact that he managed to keep his feet, he pulled his feet up as he jumped to make sure he wasn't in touch.
He's not a small man.
He's not a small man, no, and I think just him also being able to keep control of the ball with one hand as well is just pretty impressive. So for me, it's got to be that one.
And for you, Alex?
Yeah, I've got to agree. The absolute mitts on the guy to be able to do that. It's amazing.
Yeah, hugely impressive. Well, I believe that's our second Abbey Wow moment of the week that we are sending to Duhan. So Duhan, if you're listening, that is coming in the post, but I imagine much like the first one that we sent you, it might get lost and take a little bit of time to get there. But what we're going to do now is take a look at the other tournament that has been running alongside the Guinness Six Nations Championship, and that is the Under-20s tournament. And over the course of this championship, I've been heading up to Scotstoun Stadium following Scotland's Under-20 side, and after their game against Italy, I caught up with David Barnes of the Offside Line to run through the Under-20 Championship and how the Scotland team has got on. We're here at an empty Scotstoun Stadium after Scotland's final match of the Under-20s Championship, and I'm joined by David Barnes from the Offside Line. In terms of the tournament as a whole, across all of the matches, how have you found covering the Under-20s Championship?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's great. I mean, I think, you know, as much as it kind of grates with me that Ireland are so good, it's really impressive to see that, you know, and it should give us inspiration. You know, I've really enjoyed it. I mean, these guys are amazing athletes, all of them, you know, and we talk about the Scottish guys being underprepared, but you know, you go down there and stand next to them when we're waiting to do the interviews, and you realise they're big men as well. They're just, yeah, you know, they don't look quite as big when we're up here and they're against even bigger boys from Italy and stuff. So I think, you know, Under-20s rugby is, I mean, it's really impressive how that's developed, how they're creating good players younger than they did 5-10 years ago. So you know, and it's great to watch this kind of rugby. You know, some days I think I'd much rather be here than at Full House Murrayfield.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. So speaking of that Ireland side, they were so dominant last week, as they have been throughout the tournament. They've got a sold-out Musgrave Park for that finale against England. What is it that's separating them from the rest of the championship?
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? That's what we'd love to know. I mean, and you look at the senior team. You know, they've now got the Grand Slam as well, and that's from a Scottish perspective. That's really what that's the big frustration. You know, Ireland traditionally we were very similar. When I was growing up, there was a long period we beat Ireland every, all levels all the time, and it doesn't happen like that anymore. So they've just got the system right. They're very lucky. They've got really strong schools, private school system in Dublin, which brings a lot of players through. They've really nurtured that. It's become, it's a selling point for these schools. We have a bit of that in Scotland, but realistically only 4 or 5 schools that really invest in anywhere near the same level. So we've got guys that are coming through. They've got guys that are coming out of the school system. Their academy. These are effectively academies coming out, ready-made players, and they're getting these guys good rugby exposure in the Irish leagues.
What were your thoughts on Scotland's final performance in this tournament?
I think mildly encouraged. I think we all know that they had a really tough evening last Friday when Ireland took 80 points off them. So it was really just about regaining some pride, and they certainly did that the first half. They came out, and with the wind at their back, admittedly, they took the game to Italy, defended really well, scored early on, and it could have gone either way at half time. They kind of got blown away a wee bit in the third quarter. Probably their scrum, their set piece under a bit of pressure, physicality began to tell. But they hung in there and they scored again late on, and they come away with their heads held high, I would feel.
congratulations to Ireland for winning the Grand Slam in the Under-20s Six Nation Championship, repeating the feat of what the senior team managed to do just 24 hours earlier. Now, though, we're going to join Alex and James in talking tactics as they look through a section of the Scotland-Italy game.
Hello and welcome back to Talking Tactics. And this week we are going through a brilliant bit of captaincy from Jamie Ritchie. This is contrasting to last week when he got marched back 3 times by Luke Pearce. And also Owen Farrell did something special, or not special this week.
Well, not special, because during the incident with the red card in the game against Ireland, a lot of people were saying he could have maybe managed that a bit better to ensure that it wasn't a red and was a yellow. So we're going to see Jamie Ritchie getting it right against Italy.
But if you look at the slide here, Jamie Ritchie is already talking to the referee, and it's 14 minutes in. He's telling the ref to look at what Italy are doing in the breakdowns, which is a really good bit of communication. And if we flip it on, he carries on doing it throughout the game into the 22nd minute. And one of the key skills about being a captain is keeping that dialogue with the referee, because it gives you an advantage, doesn't it, James?
Yeah, just building a relationship with the referee is kind of something you talk about a bit, but it is really true. And we're going to see in the next couple of slides why that pays dividends for Scotland.
Yeah, so in the 23rd minute, the first scrum of the game happens, and they're all told to keep their height up because the referee doesn't want to be running around at scrum time trying to ping people. But as we move on, the first scrum goes down inevitably, which is always the case, isn't it? And as we move on even further, the refs told especially Italy to keep their height up. And what that means is Riccioni here has to control the shove from the second rows. But the first thing he does is put his hand on the floor. That's not good, is it, James?
It's not good. And as you can see, the referee is right there. He is waiting and he's watching for that. And in a few seconds later, we're going to see who is the first person who's going to come and have a chat with him. What they're going to do? Well, they have another scrum.
Yep.
In the same position. And just a few minutes later it is.
Yeah, it's a few minutes later in the 26th minute. And there's a scrum in the midfield. And as we roll it on, it collapses again. And Italy are pinged again. There's a penalty given away. And as we move it even further, there's another scrum. And this is worrying for Scotland, because if you look down here, they've been in the 22 for 4 minutes already. That's quite a lot in this phase of the game, isn't it, James?
Yeah. Spending that much time in the 22, you are expected to score. So basically, if it doesn't go right for Scotland here, they're going to get absolutely bruised by the coaches at half time. So this is where the captaincy comes in, isn't it?
They need something from these scrums. So as it goes down again, and another penalty is given, they keep on picking the scrums, but the Italy front row are actually dragged away from the scrums and told by the referee, look, I'm going to give a yellow card if another scrum penalty is given. But who's there listening, James?
That is Mr. Jamie Ritchie. He is getting his ear in there. He's making sure he knows what the referee is telling to those Italian front row. And then he's going to relay that message back to the Scotland team.
Yes, he is. And you can see here having a meeting with his pack and going, right, boys, we need to bring this down. I can't tell you how impressive this is, because not a lot of captains will do this throughout World Rugby. But we move it on, and you can see here, just in the edge, that the Italy pack are just about to fall over, and you'd think that it's Italy who are at fault here. However, that bind, you played in the front row, James, it looks a little bit short to me.
Yes, definitely very short here. And I think what we can see here is, essentially, I think this front row going into this scrum never had any intention of trying to retain this ball. All they were looking for was to get it down, because it's been 4 or 5 minutes in that 22. In the minds of the referees, always going to be looking on to Scotland's favour. And what he's done is he's put his bind nice and short on his arm and twisted him in just to try to get him to fall down.
Yeah, and obviously as it rolls on, the scrum goes down, so a penalty's given, and then Riccioni gets a yellow card. So this all comes off the back of Jamie Ritchie having that chat with the referee and building that rapport. And as a result, Gacy has to go off, which is pretty sad for him because it's his debut. But there's a lot of space out wide, as we can see here, James, and who's lurking in the wing.
Just about, you can see his head poking into shot is the dangerous Duhan van der Merwe.
Yes.
And obviously, they are a man down, Italy, on this wide side. The wing is gone. So they know he's the danger man. They think, right, the ball's going out to him. They're going to give him a bit of space. He's going to barge through us. And so we need to defend him out on that wing.
Yeah, and as we roll it on, all of these Italian defenders are running to the wing because they know that's where the space is. If you see that box, Duhan van der Merwe is king in that area, isn't he? We saw on the weekend, he scored that absolutely amazing floating try. So they're all running forward. And Blair Kinghorn
is just about to step one of the defenders and go and score.
Score on the inside, yeah. And that's really intelligent from him. And I'm sure he has thought of that before he even gets the ball in his hands. Like, he knows that Duhan's that danger man, and that's why he's so good to have out there in the attacking spaces. But, Blair Kinghorn had an awesome game, obviously, scored 3 tries. And this was, a length of the field is brilliant, but I think this is more intelligent and such an impressive try from Scotland.
And it's all built off of the back of a bit of Jamie Ritchie, brilliant captaincy and some brilliant work at the scrum from Scotland. And that is our Talking Tactics for this week.
With this being the final round of the Six Nations Championship, there is no more games for us to preview. So instead, what we're going to do is look ahead to the Rugby World Cup that is taking place in September. And because they did such a good job with Talking Tactics, James and Alex now join me to roll through the home teams, but also look ahead to some of the things we can expect from this year's World Cup. And what we'll do is we'll roll through the pools A to D, and we'll start with that pool A. Hosts France in a group alongside the likes of New Zealand, Italy, Uruguay and Namibia. And James, after that encounter we saw in Rome where Italy pushed France so close in that game, can we expect that sort of fire to come from Italy again in this group?
I think they will be really encouraged by that performance against France, that hopefully we will see a fiery contest when it comes round to the World Cup. And they've definitely got it in, and we've seen every game, maybe bar one in the Six Nations, that they've been competitive. However, it's going to be the World Cup. It's going to be in France this time. So I don't think the result is going to be as close this time. Obviously, France start their campaign against New Zealand in this pool. So they're going to have a tough time of it against that in the opening game, and absolutely rip-roaring starter to the World Cup. But Italy will start against Namibia. So it's going to be a slightly easier way for them. So maybe, France might be a bit battered by their first game. So, they have coming to Italy, having to prove something, maybe having to get a win in order to get through the pool. Italy, they've eased in with Namibia, but, they've had an easier game. And then they're rip-roaring going into France. So all up for grabs, who knows?
And it was quite interesting. At the end of the Scotland-Italy game, Kieran Crowley, Alex, talks about how he felt that actually this Italy side can take on anyone. And I suppose to an extent they've proven that in this Six Nations Championship, pushing all the other teams to within a couple of scores. But is this group going to be too much for Italy to get out of?
Yeah, I think on paper it definitely is, but they've shown that they can hang with the best teams in the world, because the best teams in the world are in the Northern Hemisphere right now. Ireland and France are two of the two top teams. So, yeah, I can't see them getting out of it, but they have played better than any Italy team has ever played before. They haven't won a game, but they've showed that they can do things that are actually innovative, like having Michele Lamoureux do some phases at 9 to try and get wider attack, which you just wouldn't see from any other Italy team. So.
And James, we've talked about France and New Zealand, two of the finest teams in the world in this group together. But one group along from them, in the same side of the draw, we've got the reigning world champion South Africa. We've got the number one team in the world, Ireland. Group B has often been described as the group of death, and I think it's going to be one hell of a contest for Scotland to try and compete. But also, I think we should be expecting some curveballs from the likes of Tonga and Romania. Who do you think is going to top this group?
Oh, Tonga easily. No. South Africa, Ireland and Scotland, wow, what an incredible pool to have. Obviously, this draw was done a long time ago, so Scotland was slightly lower down in the rankings at the time, and they've risen after a really impressive Six Nations. So this is the pool of death, as we like to call it. South Africa v Ireland is going to be a really interesting physical battle. South Africa always step up at World Cups because they're just huge men. And it's always a difficult prospect to come up against. I think Ireland and Scotland, again, just, a home nations battle in a group stage is always so interesting. And when it came, last time round in the World Cup, they both lost to Japan. So it's not for certain how they're going to perform at World Cups. It's always a bit of a joke that Ireland have never made it past a quarter-final. I think they'll make it out the group, but then I think, as you'll probably touch on, they've got some tough opportunities in the quarters and the semis.
Yeah, and Alex, Ireland, out of these three top teams in this group, have got the easier start. They go up against Romania, but Scotland and South Africa start this Pool B going up against each other. And for Scotland to make it out of the group, they've got to beat either South Africa or Ireland. And quite frankly, if I'm Scotland right now, I'd feel a lot more confident about that opening game against South Africa than I would about going up against Ireland. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think South Africa have got some glaring weaknesses. I don't think they've got a proper fly half. They've had to play Willie Leroux there a couple of times, and although he's an amazing player, he's not a fly half. And at test level, I think that makes a massive difference. For me anyway, I'd say that Scotland could probably go and win that game, and they're going to have to put all of their emotional energy into it, because I can't see them beating Ireland in the group stage if Ireland have got everyone fit and it's 15-on-15. But look, it's going to be probably the most important game of that group, and it will be a really, really close one.
Certainly, there is no possibility that Scotland win that game unless they have all of their weapons. So they need to have Finn Russell, they need to have a full pack again with Richie Gray, with Grant Gilchrist, with all of their options available. And if Scotland overcook their prep coming into it, they've got 4 World Cup warm-up games. And if they overcook that like they did back in the Japan World Cup, well, then they haven't got a hope against South Africa in that opening one. But James, on the other side of the draw, Pool C and Pool D, because it was done so many years ago in the ridiculous way that World Rugby does, we've ended up with probably the softer side of the draw in Pool C and Pool D. And that first group, Pool C, it's got Wales and Australia, who, when this draw was done, were 2 fantastic teams, very much world-beating teams. But now they perhaps don't offer the same sort of strength that they used to have done.
Yeah, especially Wales. We've gone into this many times, all the things that Wales have done. I think maybe when it comes around to a World Cup, it will be a slightly different story. The Welsh national pride has something about it, right? That just is the kind of nation that's going to step up past all of the problems. Hopefully, the regional contractual issues may have been somewhat addressed by that point, and they can go to a World Cup with the security of their finances, with the security of their job, and go and perform for Wales. That's what we hope that we will see. Is Warren Gatland's experience at a World Cup, is that going to come into it? We always talk about World Cup experiences. I think it probably will. And I think it will be shown not necessarily in the game against Australia, which is going to be a big one, but in those games against Fiji, against Georgia, against Portugal, where they're going to be absolutely gunning for them. The likes of Georgia, obviously, they've beaten Wales in the autumn. They're going to be gunning for them, and I think it's not going to be an interesting game, that Wales-Georgia game, but I think hopefully Wales will be able to get their noses in front.
Yeah, Georgia coming into this, Alex, having won the Rugby Europe Championship for the 6th time in a row. They're very much the best of the rest in Europe. Have they got any chance of pulling off, I suppose, the upset of the group stage and making it out of this pool?
Oh, God, I hope so. I hope so much, but probably not. They had their best day in the history of their country's rugby when they went away and beat Wales, and I think they'll have to do that again to go and beat them, but it's number 1 on my Christmas list, I think, that, to be honest.
And speaking of things that we want to happen, James, if the stars align in the rugby world, everything falls into place, then we get the prospect of Australia going up against England in the quarterfinals. England find themselves in the same group as Japan, Argentina, Samoa, and Chile. And if the stars align, as we said, then they get a quarterfinal matchup against Australia. We've got Eddie Jones against Steve Borthwick, Eddie Jones against his former side. Before we get to that, how well do you think England are going to perform in this group? And have you seen enough over the Six Nations to see England come out and comfortably beat the likes of Argentina and Japan to an extent as well?
Not comfortably, probably, especially because Argentina obviously beat us in the autumn not that long ago. Japan and Argentina are growing sides. I think we've probably got the easiest pool, and yet it's not one that I can see us walking out of. No. It should be one we should be able to walk out of, and it all stems on if we're able to build an attacking phase play, an attacking structure in 2 games' time. We've got 2 games between now and that opening round fixture against Argentina, who have a pretty good attacking backline themselves, especially in that back 3. So I'm not sure we're going to walk out of it, but I think if we don't, we will end up top, hopefully.
Yeah.
And just touching on Argentina, James mentioned the back line. They're one of these teams, Alex, who are quite hit and miss. When they're firing all cylinders. They're brilliant to watch.
Yeah.
They've got one of the most impressive attacking styles of rugby. But when it implodes like it did against Scotland in the Autumn Nations, it's not pretty. Do you think we're going to see enough consistency from Argentina to, first of all, top this group and then start to make some sort of a run towards perhaps the semi-finals of the World Cup?
Again, it's a bit similar to the Pool B one, where Scotland need to go and beat South Africa, Argentina need to beat England, and then they'll almost certainly top the group. I can't see Japan beating them, but that's just me. And then they've got Samoa and Chile, which is an easy win. But to your point about inconsistency, I think it's one of those things that people used to say about France. It's about which Argentina turns up, right? But if Buffelli has got his kicking boots on, I know he's been a bit dodgy for Edinburgh, but if he's got his kicking boots on, they can beat anyone because they can score points from anywhere.
And James, the big question coming out of this side of the draw is if, as we said, the stars align, we get England against Australia, Eddie Jones against his old team, who is the country that progresses through to the semi-finals of the World Cup?
I think England do.
Really?
I think England do. I think obviously there is a humongous narrative that we'll all enjoy playing out on this, the Eddie Jones versus England, or the Eddie Jones returning to England. But I know for a fact we're going to be sitting in a press conference and he'll be going, just another game, mate, just another game. Yeah. And I know that is not true. That's what he'll say. And I'm sure he'll want to prove something over his former employees. But I think as it stands, I think England have got this in the bag.
Well, the Rugby World Cup is in September. We've got many months between now and then, and that gives England plenty of time to turn around their performances after what was a poor Six Nations. But for now, the streets of Dublin are painted green as Ireland win their first Grand Slam at home on St Patrick's Day, their fourth during this championship. And the question remains whether or not they've got enough paint to carry it all the way to Paris and turn Paris green for the Rugby World Cup. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in to the TW2's Six Nations review shows. My huge thanks go to James Price, Alex Reid, Imogen Ainsworth, Caleb Matomba, and to Ruben Blignott behind the camera, producing the shows each and every week. And finally, thank you to you for tuning in. And don't worry, don't go anywhere. We've got plenty more rugby coverage starting this weekend as the Women's TikTok Six Nations kick off in Newcastle as England play host to Scotland. But for now, we'll see you next time in the TW2.